What if I told you that for almost 500 years, there's been a human brain hanging on the ceiling of one of the holiest churches on the planet? Not a painting of a brain, not a symbol, an anatomically precise cross-section. The folds, the grooves, even the tiny gland at the base that controls half your body's hormones, painted directly into the center of the most famous religious image in human history, and hidden so well that millions of people have looked straight at it and never seen it. Cardinals electing popes underneath that ceiling, restorers spending years with their faces inches from the plaster, art historians who've written entire books about this fresco. Nobody noticed anything. Until 1990, when a doctor, not an art historian, just an ordinary physician from small-town America, flipped through a medical journal on his lunch break and saw what the entire world had been staring at for 500 years, but had never actually seen. What he found may be the boldest, most dangerous secret ever hidden inside a religious commission, because if he's right, Michelangelo used the Pope's own chapel to smuggle past the censors an idea that in the 16th century could have gotten him branded a heretic. This is that story. Let's start with the man who almost refused to paint the ceiling at all. Pope Julius II, nicknamed the Warrior Pope for personally leading armies to expand Vatican territory, summons a 33-year-old sculptor to Rome. Not a painter, a sculptor. Michelangelo had made his name carving marble, and he saw painting as beneath him. He tries to refuse. Legend says he even suspected a rival, the architect Bramante, of setting him up to fail. But you didn't say no to Julius II twice. He accepts. What follows are 4 of the most brutal years of his life. He designs custom scaffolding that lets him stand, neck craned backward for hours, paint constantly dripping into his eyes. In his own letters, he describes his spine twisting into a shape that took months to correct afterward. Modern physicians who've studied his symptoms suspect chronic low-level arsenic poisoning from the pigments themselves. He was, by every account, exhausted and miserable nearly the entire time. And yet what emerged became arguably the single most reproduced image human beings have ever created. 9 scenes from the Book of Genesis across 12,000 square feet of plaster. At the center, the creation of Adam. God reaching out of a swirling mass of drapery and angels, finger extended toward a newly formed Adam. Their fingertips almost touching, separated by the thinnest sliver of empty space in art history. That gap has been copied more than almost any image ever painted, on posters, in textbooks, in phone commercials, in 1,000 internet memes. Everyone recognizes it instantly, but for nearly 500 years, almost nobody looked past the hands. Fast forward to 1990. Frank Meshberger is a physician practicing in Anderson, Indiana. Flipping through the Journal of the American Medical Association, he sees a reproduction of the creation of Adam, and something catches his eye. Not as a viewer admiring the composition, but as someone trained to recognize the human body from the inside. He looks closer at the red drapery surrounding God and the angels, and what he sees stops him cold. That shape isn't just fabric billowing in some divine wind. Structurally, it's an almost exact cross-section of the human brain. He starts mapping it, the way you'd read an MRI scan. The folds of the drapery match the folds of the cerebral cortex. A gap in the fabric lines up precisely with the sylvian fissure, a major groove separating lobes of the brain. And hanging off the bottom, almost hidden, is a small protrusion in almost exactly the position of the pituitary gland, a structure so obscure that formal medical understanding of it didn't exist until centuries after Michelangelo was dead. Meshberger publishes his findings in JAMA, and the art world doesn't quite know what to do with it. Here's why this theory refuses to go away. We know Michelangelo performed illegal human dissections, almost certainly at the Church of Santo Spirito in Florence, where the prior secretly granted him access to corpses from the hospital. This wasn't sanctioned research. Dissecting human bodies was heavily restricted by the church at the time. Michelangelo did it anyway, secretly, for years, to understand what was actually happening underneath the skin, the muscle, the bone, and very likely the brain. So here's the theory. Michelangelo, devoutly religious but famously independent-minded, takes on the most important commission of his career. Genesis says God breathed life, and with it, intellect and soul, directly into Adam. Pure divine breath, nothing physical required. But what if Michelangelo, after years of secretly studying human anatomy, believed something slightly different? What if he believed human consciousness was inseparable from a physical organ sitting inside his own skull? A belief that, stated outright, could have gotten him branded a heretic by the very institution paying him. And what if, instead of saying it out loud, he painted it, hid it in plain sight, disguised as drapery, disguised as clouds, disguised as the wind of God's own creative power? It gets stranger. Years later, two neurosurgeons, Ian Sook and Raphael Tamargo from Johns Hopkins, looked even more closely at the rest of the ceiling. They focused on a different panel, the separation of light from darkness, the very first scene in the ceiling's Genesis sequence. What they found, hidden in the folds of God's neck and chest, was another anatomical structure, this time resembling the human brainstem, connected to a section of spinal cord. The proportions, they argued, were too precise to be accidental. One hidden structure could be coincidence, pattern recognition, finding meaning where none was intended. But in two separate panels depicting two neurologically connected structures, that starts to look less like an accident and more like a system, a code repeated deliberately across the most important religious ceiling in the Western world. So what does the Vatican say about all this? Officially, almost nothing. There's no statement confirming that Michelangelo embedded secret anatomical messages into the ceiling of Catholicism's most important chapel. And that silence makes sense. Confirming a deliberate act of encoded heresy inside a papally commissioned masterpiece isn't exactly something the Church has an incentive to endorse. There's no letter from Michelangelo, no diary entry, no confession explaining his true intentions. Some art historians remain openly skeptical. Michelangelo was, above everything, an obsessive student of the human form. Finding anatomy-shaped patterns in his work isn't necessarily proof of an intentional code. It might just be proof that he was extraordinarily good at drawing bodies. But the counter-argument is hard to dismiss. Artists before him and after him painted God surrounded by simple clouds, simple robes. The level of anatomical specificity Meshberger identified goes far beyond what was artistically necessary. Why include details that precise, in a shape that specific, unless it meant something? We may never know for certain. Michelangelo died in 1564 at 88 years old, having outlived nearly everyone who might have pressed him for an answer. If he was hiding something up there, he took the full explanation to his grave. What we do know is this. For 478 years, from the ceiling's completion in 1512 until Meshberger's discovery in 1990, One of the most visited, most photographed ceilings on the planet may have quietly contained a private argument about the true nature of the human mind, a small act of intellectual rebellion painted directly into the heart of the institution he was working for, disguised so completely that it took nearly 5 centuries and a physician's untrained eye glancing at a magazine during his lunch break to even begin to notice. So the next time you see that image, God's hand reaching toward Adam's, fingers almost touching, look a little closer at what's wrapped around them. Because if this theory is right, Michelangelo wasn't only painting the creation of a man, he may have been quietly painting the birth of a thought and daring every single person standing beneath it for the next 500 years to actually look up and really see it. If you want to see what other secrets the world's most famous artworks have been hiding in plain sight, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.